about Albert Einstein, Out of My Later Years, revisit and reprint edition. I want to read some info in English to make a better effort to learn this language. Publisher's preface. The second volume of collected essays by Albert Einstein covers a period of about 15 years, 34 to 50. The first anthology, published until the title The World as I Say It, comprising matter from 22 to 34. Albert Einstein does not belong to that group of scholars who live in the ivory tower of their research work, oblivious to the work around them. On the contrary, he has always been an astute and critical observer of the trends and needs of his time. Indeed, frequently did he intervene by written as well as spoken appeal, and always we should like to emphasize for a humanitarian cause. In this sense, Out of My Later Years mirrors the philosophical as well as political and social attitudes of its author. The chapters themselves represented races, articles, letters, appeals, and miscellaneous papers hitherto unpublished. We feel privileged to offer them to the public with hardly an editorial change, a moving document of the workings of a conscientious, profound, and deeply human mind, convictions and belief, self-portrait of what it is significant is one's own existence one is hardly aware, and it certainly should not bother the other flow. What does a fish know about the water in which he swims all his life? The bitter and the sweet come from the outside, the hurt from within, from one's own efforts. For the most part one do the thing which my own nature drives me to do. It is embarrassing to earn so much respect and love for it. Arrows of hate have been shot at me too, but they never hit me, because somehow they belonged to another world with which I have no connection whatsoever. I live in that solitude which is painful in youth, but delicious in the years of maturity. About 10 fateful years. Reading once again the lines I wrote almost 10 years ago, I received two strangely contrasting impressions. What I wrote then still seems essentially as true as ever, yet it all seems curiously remote and strange. How can that be? Has the world changed so profoundly in 10 years? Or is it merely that I have grown 10 years older, and my eyes see everything in a changed, dimmer light? What are 10 years in the history of humanity? Must not all those forces that determine the life of man be regarded as constant compared with such a trifling interval? Is my critical reason so susceptible that the physiological change in my body during those 10 years has been able to influence my concept of life so deeply? It seems clear to me that such consideration can throw light upon a change in the emotional approach to the general problems of life. Normally, the reasons for this curious change be sought in my own external circumstances, for I know that these have always played a subordinate part in my thoughts and emotions. No, something quite different is involved. In this 10 years, confidence in the stability, yes, even the very basis for existence of human society has largely vanished. One sense not only a threat to man's cultural heritage, but also that a lower value is placed upon all that one would like to see defended at all costs. Conscious man, to be sure, has at all times been keenly aware that life is an adventure, that life must forever be wrested from death. In part the dangers were external. One might fall downstairs and break one's neck, lose one's livelihood without fault. be condemned to innocent or ruined by calumny. Life in human society meant dangers of all sorts, but these dangers were chaotic in nature, subject to chance. Human society as a whole seemed stable. Measured by the ideals of taste and morals, it was decidedly imperfect. But all in all, one felt at home with it, and apart from the many kinds of accidents, comparatively safe in it. One accepted its intrinsic qualities as a matter of course, as the air one breathed. Even standards of virtue, aspiration, and practical truth were taken for granted as an inviolable heritage common to all civilized humanity. To be sure, the First World War had already shaken this feeling of security. The sanctity of life vanished, and the individual was no longer able to do as he pleased and to go where he liked. The lie was raised to the dignity of a political instrument. The war was, however, widely regarded as an external event, hardly or not at all as the result of man's conscious, planful action. It was thought of as an interruption of man's normal life from the outside, universally considered unfortunate and evil. The feeling of security in regard to human aims and values remained, for the main part, unshaken. The subsequent development is sharply marked by political events that are not as far-reaching as the less easily grasped socio-psychological background. First, a brief, promising step forward characterized by the creation of the League of Nations, through the grandiose initiative of Wilson and the establishment of a system of collective security among the nations. Then the formation of fascist states, attended by a series of broken pacts and disguised acts of violence against humanity and against weaker nations. The system of collective security collapsed like a house of cards, a collapse, the consequences of which can't be measured even today. It was a manifestation of weakness of character and lack of responsibility on the part of the leaders in the affected countries, and of short-sighted selfishness in the democracies, those that still remain outwardly intact, which prevented any vigorous counterattack. Things grew even worse than a pessimist of the deepest dye would have dared prophesy. In Europe, to the east of the Rhine, free exercise of the intellect exists no longer. The population is terrorized by gangsters who have seized power, and youth is poisoned by systematic lies. The pseudo-success of political adventurers has dazzled the rest of the world. It becomes apparent everywhere that his generation lacks the strength and force which enabled previous generations to win, in painful struggle and at a great sacrifice, the political and individual freedom of man. Awareness of this state of affairs overshadows every hour of my present existence. Well, 10 years ago it did not yet occupy my thoughts. It is this that I feel so strongly in rereading the words written in the past. And yet, I know that all in all man changed but little, even thought prevailing notions make him appear in a very different light at different times, and even thought current trends like the present bring him unimaginable sorrow. Nothing of all that will remain but a few pitiful pages in these storybooks, briefly picturing to the youth of future generations the follies of its ancestors. Moral decay. All religions, arts, and science are branches of the same tree. All these aspirations are directed toward ennobling man's life, lifting it from the sphere of mere physical existence and leading the individual toward freedom. It is no mere chance that our older universities have developed from clerical schools, but both churches and universities, insofar as they live up to their true function, serve the ennoblement of the individual. They seek to fulfill this great task by spreading moral and cultural understanding, renouncing the use of brute force. The essential unity of ecclesiastical and secular cultural institutions was lost during the 19th century to the point of senseless hostility, yet there never was any doubt as to the striving for culture. No one doubted the sacredness of the goal. It was the approach that was disputed. The political and economic conflicts and complexities of the last few decades have brought before our eyes dangers which even the darkest pessimist of the last century did not dream of. The injunctions of the Bible concerning human conduct were then accepted by believer and infidel alike as self-evident demands for individuals and society. No one would have been taken seriously who failed to acknowledge the quest for objective truth and knowledge as man's highest and eternal aim. Yet today we must recognize with horror that these pillars of a civilized human existence have lost their firmness. Nations that once ranked high bow down before tyrants who dare openly to assert, right is that which serves us. The quest for truth, for its own sake, has no justification and is not to be tolerated. Arbitrary rule, oppression, persecutions of individuals, faiths, and communities are openly practiced in those countries and accepted as justifiable or inevitable. And the rest of the world has slowly grown accustomed to the symptoms of moral decay. One misses the elementary reaction against injustice and for justice, that reaction which in the long run represents man's only protection against a relapse into barbarism. I am firmly convinced that the passionate will for justice and truth has done more to improve man's conditions than calculating political shrewdness, which in the long run only breeds general distrust. Who can doubt that Moses was a better leader of humanity than Machiavelli? During the war, someone tried to convince a great Dutch scientist that might went before right in the history of man. I can't disprove the accuracy of your assertion, he replied, but I don't know that I should not care to live in such a world. Let us think, feel, and act like this man, refusing to accept faithful compromise. Let us not even shun the fight when it is unavoidable to preserve right and the dignity of man. If we do this, we shall soon return to conditions that will allow us to rejoice in humanity. Message for posterity. Our time is rich in inventive minds, the invention of which could facilitate our lives considerably. We are crossing the seas by power and utilize power so in order to relieve humanity from all tiring muscular work. We have learned to fly and we are able to send messages and news without any difficulty over the entire world through electric waves. However, the production and distribution of commodities is entirely unorganized, so that everybody must live in fear of being eliminated from the economic cycle, in this way suffering for the want of everything. Furthermore, people living in different countries kill each other at irregular time intervals, so that also for this reason anyone who thinks about the future must live in fear and terror. This is due to the fact that the intelligence and the character of the masses are incomparably lower than the intelligence and character of the few who produce something valuable for the community. I trust that posterity will read these statements with a feeling of proud and justified superiority. on freedom. I know that it is a hopeless undertaking to debate about fundamental value judgments. For instance, if someone approves as a goal the extirpation of the human race from the earth, one can't refute such a viewpoint on rational grounds. But if there is agreement on certain goals and values, one can argue rationally about the means by which these objectives may be attained. Let us then indicate two goals which will be agreed upon by nearly all who read these lines. 1. Those instrumental goods which should serve to maintain the life and health of all human beings should be produced by the least possible labor of all. The 2. The satisfaction of physical needs is indeed the indispensable precondition of a satisfactory existence, but in itself it is not enough. In order to be content, man must also have the possibility of developing their intellectual and artistic powers to whatever extent accord with their personal characteristics and abilities. The first of these two goals requires the promotion of all knowledge relating to the laws of nature and the laws of social processes, that is, the promotion of all scientific endeavor. For the scientific endeavor is a natural world, the parts of which mutually support one another in a way which, to be sure, no one can anticipate. However, the progress of science presupposes the possibility of unrestricted communication of all results and judgments, freedom of expression and instruction in all realms of intellectual endeavor. By freedom, I understand social condition of such a kind that the expression of opinions and assertions about general and particular matters of knowledge will not involve danger or serious disadvantages for him who expresses them. This freedom of communication is indispensable for the development and extension of scientific knowledge, a consideration of much practical import. In the first instance, it must be guaranteed by law, but laws alone can secure freedom of expression. In order that every man may present his views without penalty, there must be a spirit of tolerance in the entire population. Such an ideal of external liberty can never be fully attained, but must be sought unremittingly if scientific thought and philosophical and creative thinking in general are to be advanced as far as possible. If the second goal, that is, the possibility of the spiritual development of all individuals, is to be secured, a second kind of outward freedom is necessary. Man shall not have to work for the achievement of the necessities of life to such an extent that he has neither time nor strength for personal activities. Without this second kind of outward liberty, freedom of expression is useless for him. Advances in technology will provide the possibility of this kind of freedom if the problem of a reasonable division of labor were solved. The development of science and of the creative activities of the spirit in general requires still another kind of freedom, which may be characterized as inward freedom. It is freedom of the spirit, which consists in the independence of thought from the restrictions of authoritarian and social prejudices, as well as from unphilosophical routinizing and habit in general. This inward freedom is an African gift of nature and a worthy objective for the individual. Yet, the community can do much for further this achievement, at least by not interfering with its development. Thus, schools may interfere with the development of inward freedom through authoritarian influences and through imposing on young people excessive spiritual burdens. On the other hand, Schools may favor such freedom by encouraging independent thought only if outward and inner freedom are constantly and consciously pursued in their possibility of spiritual development and perfection, and thus of improving man's outward and inner life. Morals and emotion. We all know from what we experience within ourselves that our conscious acts spring from our desires and our fears. Intuition tells us that that is true also of our fellows and of the higher animals. We all try to escape pain and death. Will we seek what is pleasant? We all are ruled in what we do by impulses, and these impulses are so organized that our action in general serve for our self-preservation and that of the race. Hunger, love, pain, fear are some of those inner forces which rule the individual's instinct for self-preservation. At the same time, as social beings, we are moved in the relation with our fellow beings by such feelings as sympathy, pride, hate, need for power, pity, and so on. All these primary impulses, not easily described in words, are the springs of man's actions. All such action will cease if those powerful elemental forces were to cease stirring within us. Though our conduct seems so very different from that of the higher animals, the primary instincts are much alike in them and in us. The most evident difference springs from the important part which is played in man by a relatively strong power of imagination and by the capacity to think, aided as it is by language and other symbolical devices. Tao is the organizing factor in man, intersected between the causal primary instincts and the resulting action. In that way, imagination and intelligence enter into our existence in the part of servants of the primary instincts. But their intervention makes our acts to serve ever less merely the immediate claims of our instinct. Through them, the primary instinct attaches itself to ends which become ever more distant. The instincts bring thought into action, and thought provokes intermediary action inspired by emotion, which are likewise related to the ultimate end. Through repeated performance, this process brings it about that ideas and beliefs acquire and retain a strong effective power even after the end, which gave them that power are long forgotten. In abnormal cases of such intensive borrowed emotions, which cling to objects emptied of their erstwhile effective meaning, we speak of fetishism. Yet the process which I have indicated plays a very important part also in ordinary life. Indeed, there is no doubt that to this process, which one may describe as a spiritualizing of the emotions and of thought, that to it man owes the most subtle and refined pleasures of which he is capable. The pleasure in the beauty of artistic creation and of logical trains of thought. As far as I can see, there is one consideration which stands at the threshold of all moral teaching. If man, as individuals, surrender to the call of their elementary instincts, avoiding pain and seeking satisfaction only for their own selves, the result for them, all taken together, must be a state of insecurity, of fear, and of promiscuous misery. If besides that they use their intelligence from an individualist, a selfish standpoint, building up their life on the illusion of a happy and attached existence, things will be hardly better. In comparison with the other elementary instincts and impulses, the emotions of love, of pity, and of friendship are too weak and too cramped to lead to a tolerable state of human society. The solution of this problem, when freely considered, is simple enough, and it seems also to echo from the teachings of the wise men of the past, always in the same strain. All men should let their conduct be guided by the same principles, and those principles should be such that by following them there should accrue to all as great a measure possible of security and satisfaction, and as small a measure as possible of suffering. Of course, this general requirement is much too vague that we should be able to draw from it with confidence specific rules to guide the individuals in their actions, and indeed, these specific rules will have to change in keeping with changing circumstances. If this were the main difficulty that stands in the way of that keen conception, the millenary fate of man would have been incomparably happier than it actually was, or still is. Man would not have killed man, tortured each other, exploited each other by force and by guilt. The real difficulty, the difficulty which has baffled the sages of all time, is rather this: how can we make our teaching so potent in the emotional life of man that its influence should withstand the pressure of the elemental psychic forces in the individual? We do not know, of course, if the sages of the past have really asked themselves this question consciously and in this form, but we do know how they have tried to solve the problem. Long before man were ripe, namely, to be fasted with such a universal moral attitude, fear of the danger of life had led them to attribute to various imaginary personal beings, not physically tangible, power to release those natural forces which man feared or perhaps welcomed, and they believed that those beings which everywhere dominated their imagination were psychically made in their own image, but were endowed with superhuman powers. These were the primitive precursors of the idea of God, sprang in the first place from the fears which filled man's daily life. The belief in the existence of such beings and in their extraordinary powers has had so strong an influence on man and their conduct that is difficult for us to imagine. Hence, it is not surprising that those who set out to establish the moral idea as embracing all men equally did so by linking it closely with religion. And the fact that those moral claims were the same for all men may have had much to do with the development of mankind's religious culture, from polytheism to monotheism. The universal moral idea thus owed its original psychological potency to that link with religion, yet in another sense that close association was fatal for the moral idea. Monotheistic religion occurred different forms with various peoples and groups, although those differences were by no means fundamental, yet they soon were felt more strongly than the essentials that were common, and in that way religion often caused enmity and conflict, instead of blinding mankind together with the universal moral idea. Then came the growth of the natural sciences, with their great influence on thought and practical life, weakening still more in modern times the religious sentiment of the peoples. The causal and objective mode of thinking, thus not necessarily in contradiction with the religious sphere, leaves in most people little room for a deepening religious sense, and because of the traditional close link between religion and morals that has brought with it in the last 100 years or so a serious weakening of moral thought and sentiment, that to my mind it's the main cause for the barbarization of political ways in our time, taken together with the terrifying efficiency of the new tactical means. The barbarization already forms a fearful threat for the civilized world. Needless to say, one is glad that religion